You have the fun, you got to do the maintenance and the repairs. This episode I want to look at the diff breathers, whether or not it's worth extending them for starters, and once they are extended, is that it? Will you let water in? So we spent the 3 weeks up north and we did a lot of deep water crossings. Now all the crossings we were mobile. We didn't get stuck in the middle of any or stop for any particular reason in the deeper parts. So there were quite a few that were over the diffs. So the axle seals were in the water, but having the extended breathers, we've got the breather up in the toolbox or under the bonnet, wherever they may be. We're going to drain the oil now and see if it worked, if there's any water in the diffs, or if it's still clean oil. Now, we traveled about 3,000 kilometers towing the van. We were in low range for 22 days. It's not a lot of use for this particular oil change because I put new oil in it before we left home, but the risk that we have water in it is high. So I want to drop it. I want to put new oil in it. We're off on another adventure in a couple of weeks. I want to know that the diffs, gearbox and transfer case are clean and good to go. Now, I have been caught out before. I had extended breathers in at that particular time, but we did get stuck and we were in there quite a while. It was a self-recovery, so probably the car was in the water, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes. So in my opinion there, the breather was still above the water, the top of the water level, but my axles were still in the water. Now I believe that once that diff is hot, there does create a vacuum through the seals. It's the only explanation I can have. Oil doesn't come out of an axle seal, but I'm pretty sure water can get sucked into it. So this was the color of the oil that I drained, and it probably took about 5 or 6 changes to get it back to its clean color. So I did a couple of thousand Ks, dropped it, put new oil in again. A good wash to start proceedings, just basically to make it clean so that when you're under it working, taking stuff apart, that you're not getting dirt in your eyes. Because my plan is to fish oil inside the rails and also give the housings a coat of epoxy enamel on all the surface rust that's come about. First casualty, front diff. Oil looks good, no water in that. It looks as good as the day I put it in. So the front one I've got coming up into the engine bay, just in front of the battery. So I just find it easier to remove the Marx 4-wheel drive handbrake bash plate to do the transfer gear oil anyway. But it's also an option where we might take this shaft off and put the other one that I've got on. This was the one that I went for, you know, the patina look with the clear coat. It's obviously worn off. It's starting to get surface rust on it. But we'll take the tail shaft off, I'll swap it over, and I'll also adjust the shoes inside. This handbrake's been awesome since day one. It's a full-on bash plate. There's a bit of weight in it. It's got adjuster points, but what I'm going to do, I'm going to take the tail shaft off anyway and just properly clean and inspect in there. This is why it's easier to do the transfer case with the bash plate off. Just the position of where the drain hole is. Again, no water in it. And the rear I've got coming up into the toolbox, tucked away, out of harm's way. So 9 out of 10 times you're gonna have to clean between the bolt and the flange to get the mud out. Sometimes the socket won't go in there nicely. And I always use the 5-sided socket over the other one. Less chance of rounding any of the corners. Also, just on maintenance, this bash plate that sits under the fuel tank, where you do get a lot of mud and water go through that period, like I showed you when we were gurneying it. Apparently, you can't just undo the bridge straps and drop the bash plate down. Apparently, from what I can see, correct me if I'm wrong, but the bolts hold the bash plate and the tank on, so you've got to take it all down in the one go. That's why I just normally get in there with a gurney and let it all come out of the drain holes. You notice here that I've taken the filler plug off first, and I do have oil coming out, and then the color of the oil coming out of the drain plug is a little bit different to what it was going in. So I suspect there's a little bit of water in this rear diff. What I'll normally do after a big trip like that with the salt water is I'll change these sort of bolts. So your aftermarket accessory bolts, they're not as forgiving as some of the others on the truck. So these TJM sidestep bolts, I'll replace them 100%. I don't want to get caught one day where I need to tighten it or loosen it and it snaps. So I just go through and see here with the surface rust on things where we've hit rocks, it's all the surface rust has showed its head because of the salt water. So we'll go through and paint all of this. So the bolt I just showed you was the passenger side. Now if we come around to the driver's side here, they're not rusted. Those two same bolts are TJM sidestep bolts. Now I clearly remember Shell on one of the crossings coming back, it was a little bit deep and she did put the passenger side sidestep under. So that would have been that one time going in that's rusted those two bolts, 4 bolts. Whereas the driver's side stayed clear the whole trip of any salt water. I put WD-40 on the heads of them anyway, or inox. But interesting. Something else people may not think about is your winches. Now we use ours often enough, but run your winches after a big trip like that. Let the plasma dry out if you're running plasma. You'll be surprised how many winches are not waterproof. This TJM one I know is not waterproof, but it's stated that way when you buy it. But it's another maintenance thing. Next thing you know, you're going to be needing your winch. You haven't run it for 5 years and it doesn't work. Last of all now, the gearbox. This one takes the most fluid out of them all. And it's the hardest to fill. An hour's work for peace of mind. I'll also do half a can of this fish oil in each rail. Just spray it in and just let it roll around how it wants to. Longevity. I want this truck to last me as long as possible. Knowing now there's no more V8s coming out. Be as sought after as an LX Torana. Sneak a bit in behind the bash plate of the fuel tank. You just roll around in there. Also notice these rims are starting to get bad now too. The big neg 50 offset ones. No turning back from that. All done and ready for the next adventure. So in the diffs we're running the GL5 and in the gearbox and transfer the GL4. Next video is part 3 of our latest run up north. So please subscribe for notification of that one. Until then, thanks for watching.